Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kinder Sound Radio. You're here with me, your host, Juliette Bryant, and this is Transformative Health. And I'm really excited about this show today because I have a very special guest. And this special guest is focusing on a subject that has really come into my heart a lot recently. So I'm with Kiya, who is the author of Egyptian Tantric Mysteries. Welcome to the show.
Secrets. It's not mysteries, it's secrets.
Oh, secrets, sorry.
Secrets. There are mysteries contained within them, that's for sure.
There definitely are. I've been reading it, and I've been reading your first book as well, the Egyptian Tantra, and that is such a brilliant book as well. They're both amazing. And what was so exciting was that I've been on this journey recently of, for a long time on the tantric journey, but more recently it's been intensified with visions from past lives from being a priestess in the Temple of Isis. And so I've been calling for more information to come to me. And what do I see? Your book pops up. It was just a sign.
Perfect timing. Yeah.
Exactly. So tell me a little bit about your journey. Obviously, I know it's been a long journey, but tell me a little bit about how you got into Egyptian Tantra and what brought you to this point.
So I've been teaching for about 13 years. I started doing ecstatic dance, trance dance, was offering things in Brighton and London years ago now. And that naturally kind of drew me on towards breath work. And then through breath work, I then started realizing like, oh, there's this whole thing around the sexual department that I've not quite fully gone into. Like we touched on it a little bit in breath work, but I felt I had this sense that there was like more in that realm that I wanted to work on and clear within myself. So about 10 years ago, I decided to do a deep dive into Tantra, like not just like, oh, I'll do a few workshops, but I made 2 films about the subject. I went to every training and workshop I could find. I did teacher trainings. Like I did like the deepest immersion that most people could. Like I immersed myself in Tantra fully. And about 4 years ago, I was doing a training, assisting someone else, and they ran up to me very excitedly just before the class was about to start one day. They were like, "Oh my God, Kiya, you've got to try out this Egyptian energy circulation practice. Like, check this out." And so she showed me like how to map the ankh onto the body as a breath work or an energy circulation practice. It was actually more energy circulation. It was something done between 2 people, and we would send this energy out through the back of our hearts, over both crowns and into the back of our partner's hearts. And we just tried this for a few minutes, and it was like, oh my God, like that, A, that's powerful, B, I can feel the energy circuit already. Like it felt like it was some kind of a remembrance of something that on some level my body knew already. And so I was a little bit like, okay, that's interesting. But, I was on a training where we were doing like hundreds of different practices, So it was also like, okay, that was kind of cool in amongst many other things that were also cool. And around that time as well, my partner happened to be very passionate about the Magdalene manuscript. And at some point she took the book out and put it on the altar in our bedroom. And the moment I saw it, I think for the only time in my life, it literally felt like there was a ball of energy around this book. Like it felt like it was emanating light. And I was like, oh my God, like what is this book? And I felt absolutely magnetized to it, as perhaps you've also experienced as well. Like it's one of those like classic books.
It is incredible.
If you haven't read it, for anyone else that's watching, if you haven't read that book, read the book. If only read the Magdalene channel, which is the first third of the book. And that for me was the bit that kind of turned my world upside down, because up until that point, I'd been deep diving into Tantra, but I saw it very much as like, oh, this is like from India, from China with the Taoist teachings. I felt it was very much of Asia, and I didn't really associate it with Christ or Christianity or Magdalene or Egypt. And then with the reading of Magdalene manuscript, I just felt like, oh my God, like this is of this lineage as well. Like it is of the original Christian lineage. It is something that then in turn goes back to ancient Egyptian teachings, and I felt like something huge awoke in me in the reading of that book.
Yeah, I
Um,
fully concur. I think that a very similar thing happened to me reading that book, and it was that remembrance. I think, when you've had these lifetimes in these other places and you read things, they're triggers and they activate. It's like when I saw your image of your book, it activated an awareness, an awakening in me. And I think all of these, when you get the true channelings of practices, we haven't forgotten them, they're in us. And so it
mhm.
is that remembrance. It's that, oh yeah. It's like when I saw the Ankh, I studied Sekem, which is an Egyptian type of healing.
Yeah.
And the Ankh has always been a very significant thing to me, in that it's the breath of life, it's the key of life. It's this symbol to me that is a portal, it's an activation, it's like a key to unlock. So when I saw the words Egyptian Tantra and the Ankh, it was like, that just set these alarm bells, or not alarm bells, but these bells, ringing in my body of like, yes, this is what is happening. And I think for me, and I think this is probably why your work has come up so much now, is the earth is awakening, that divine feminine principle is awakening. And this is a lot of the work that I do with people, is this wild woman. It's connecting to that divine feminine, it's connecting to our sexuality, which has been repressed, suppressed. Women have been switched off sexually for a very long time.
Yeah, and I think not just women as well. Like I do feel that a lot of men carry a lot of um, suppressions and contractions around sexuality, and obviously because we're brought up in a environment and a society that um, has a very strange relationship to sex. I feel like, as in, we're presented as though we should be having lots of it, and it should all be good and fun and positive, and actually, it's almost like we get the kind of Hollywoodized version of it, or the almost like the McDonald's version of sex. We're kind of like presented with sex as like, this is something that's done for like entertainment, procreation, like go have fun, go wild, have a drink, have sex, like, so there's a whole level in which it's like embraced in the culture, and yet it's embraced in a slightly unconscious way. And the very idea of connecting sexuality to the heart and to spiritual consciousness, for some people, is like, oh my god, like you can't mention those things in the same sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I do think, even though obviously we were both born in England, um and so we've been born in a society that presents itself as secular, and yet it is still quite Christian. Like I still feel like I grew up with the belief that sex is a sin, even though my parents didn't actually ever say that out loud to me. I certainly don't remember that being spoken aloud, but it was somehow spoken in the silence, and the fact that sex wasn't even talked about. So it's like, by its very omission, you realize like, oh, there's this thing that's not discussed at the dinner table, it's not discussed at school, it's not discussed in many places, and then you start hearing about it through friends. And so I just think that, yeah, this sacred sexuality, I feel, is an intrinsic part of this divine feminine awakening that
Totally.
is happening. And I feel like it's happening in women, it's happening in men.
Yeah.
I find it kind of funny that, a year and a half ago, if you were to tell me like, oh, you're going to be channeling Isis and bringing this whole book through, I would have gone like, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy. And yet, in the unfolding of the experience, it was so undeniably powerful. Like I had such a direct connection with her, where she came into my space off the back of me doing a chant, which was an invocation chant to Isis. And on my side, I was just like a little bit naively like, oh, let's sing this chant. It sounds kind of cool, like sings in Egyptian, why not? And then she came in such a powerful way, and she said, I'm Isis, you called. And I was a little bit like, what do you mean I called? She said, well, you chanted the chant. So, that's like, it's almost like dialing a telephone
Wow.
to a god is to do an invocation chant. So that was her kind of like modern way of explaining it to me. I was a little bit like, oh, okay, sorry. And she was a little bit kind of amused by how naive I was about what I'd been doing. And at the same time, she was very gracious, and she said, like, look, we have this opportunity to for you to connect into past lives connected to Egypt, for you to connect back into this Isis lineage that you are a part of, even if you may have forgotten about it, for earlier parts of your life. You are part of this lineage, and you can bring some of this knowledge back. And it is not my knowledge. I do not claim it to be mine. It is of the Isis lineage, and I feel like it is her teachings. And so I feel like I have been blessed to be the custodian and one who can, like, bring the information through and put it into a book form. And my big hope is that people are going to read it, and most especially explore and work with the practices. The book has about, I think it's something like 30 or 35 different practices within it. And to me, that's the heart. Like, that is the mystical heart of the book. And it's, in a way, the whole point of the book is, don't just read the words, like, try the practices and see what happens in your body, in your energy body, in the aliveness that you might be able to access through working with the practices, which are, breathwork practices, movement practices, sound practices, meditation, visualization. It's like a whole combination of things. And so that would be my biggest recommendation to anyone, would be, like, try the practices out, don't just read the words. In a way,
and how would you say that these practices have, or what effect have they had on your life, on your journey? Like, how have they changed your being since they've come in?
I don't know how to answer that, because it could be a very long answer. Okay. let me try and distill it into something that's condensed. I would say one of the biggest things is, before this whole experience, I mean, I did have a connection, and what I felt I had a connection to was Great Spirit. And that always felt like a kind of a slightly abstract connection. Like, I mean, I love being in connection with Great Spirit. And yet there was something in, when Isis came in, it suddenly felt like it was, in some way, a more personal connection that I was having with this consciousness. And I felt like I was genuinely initiated, like, day by day, week by week, by her. And that was what then, all of that poured into the book. So yeah, a more personal connection. I would say also, like, it somehow kind of plugged me in more, in a way that then made life feel much more easeful and flowing. And I almost felt like, in any moment of my life, I can kind of orient towards Isis and say, like, can you give me some guidance on this?
Nice.
And every time I get, like, such incredible insights and reflections back. And it's never a thou must, you shouldst kind of an energy, like, it's more like wise counsel, insightful counsel. And then it's always like, I still, of course, have my free will, and I have the choice to heed the guidance, and to also keep following my own path in whatever way that feels right.
Beautiful. One of the things you said before, that when you were talking about sex and the kind of whole thing around it, it reminded me of cacao. And cacao was turned into chocolate, that roasted, added sugar, added dairy to switch it off. And more recently, the raw cacao and the power of the cacao to open the heart and all of this stuff is coming back. That suppression, that it was that dulling down of something that is an incredible medicine, so that everyone could have it. And I think when you were talking about sex, it was the same image came to my head. It's like, it's been dulled down, it's been McDonaldized, as you said, it's been commercialized, so that people can still access this very powerful thing, but they don't realize its power, because it's hidden. They're just going in on this surface level, and sometimes maybe hitting those points of, like, whoa, that was incredible. But I think that's what I've learned from my journey with sex and with exploring it, that sacred connection with myself through it and with someone else and with the cosmos, it's I think one of the most incredible ways to get out of your head, to get out of yourself, to not yourself, but to get out of that stress self, to get out of the kind of ego mind, and to access those higher states of consciousness, and that expansive field where you go, wow, this is where we actually reside, not just in this
Yeah.
small space, but in this expansive hugeness where actually it is all just this beautiful love field.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like you can access that, of course, through lovemaking, either on your own or with a partner. You can also access it through breathwork techniques, sound techniques. Like there's so many ways to get there. And I feel like in a way, through Egyptian Tantric Secrets, in a way it's kind of like gradually teaching you like the energy circulation practices, which are then eventually leading you to the recognition of like, okay, these are all energy circulation practices that work in their own right. Like you could breathe your way into orgasm or an ecstatic state and connection with everything, or you could sound your way to that same space, or you could move the body, shaking or dancing or lovemaking. Like there's so many paths I feel that are all leading to that super powerful connection. And so I also feel like ecstatic dance to me is also another example of another one of those things that is much like cacao. It's like it's a remembrance and a recognition of like, oh wow, like this is something that we can touch, and we don't need to lean on a drug or another substance to take us into that state. You can just access it through movement, breath, sound. And so I feel like all of the practices that I've received through this Egyptian Tantric path, I feel like they exquisitely work both as spiritual practice, and then it also very naturally maps onto lovemaking as well. So then when you're with a partner, and if you both explored these practices already, sort of on the yoga mat, as it were, then it's almost like it just kind of automatically fires up in the midst of lovemaking. Or you can consciously choose to elevate and raise the energy if it feels like it's all kind of getting stuck down in the lower centers. So then it starts naturally being brought up and expanded at the level of the heart, which would then be the wings of the ankh. And then it's also being raised up through all the higher chakras, which then becomes like the loop of the ankh. So I just find it so exquisite, like the wisdom that's held within the ankh and within these practices that were left behind for us.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. I've been doing the from your Egyptian Tantra book, the Ankh breathwork recently, and it's really beautiful. I'm really enjoying it and feeling it. One of the things that I found with it is sometimes I don't do the arms, the movements, but I just imagine, if you're laying in bed, you can't always, do the movements, but actually just breathing into my heart and feeling that expanding out as if it was the ankh, and then expanding up is just an amazing thing. So I highly recommend people look at both your books, because I'm really getting a lot out of the Egyptian Tantra and following the kind of ankh breathwork from that. It's really, really an amazing technique.
So how I kind of relate to these two books, I feel in a way like Egyptian Tantra, it's like the mini book for me. I see that as almost like the younger brother. And then the main book, Egyptian Tantric Secrets, is like, that's the real deal Isis full power transmission.
Got it.
So I feel like in a way, like the younger brother one, it was actually what I gathered after I'd got all the downloads and the channels from Isis. I was a little bit like, well, I want to now research Egypt and see how does all this that I've received fit together with commonly held knowledge in Egypt. And so actually a lot of that ended up getting put into this book, Egyptian Tantra. And the more that I researched, the more I was like, oh my God, like this actually fits perfectly, So in some ways it was kind of going back into looking at like the hieroglyphs and the artwork and everything that has been left behind as like the gifts of the Egyptian culture, which amazingly still exists today. And I feel like there is wisdom, like there's so, when you start looking at the hieroglyphs with tantric eyes, you know, when you look with that awareness of, has this got some kind of secret message for me about tantra, the more you look with those eyes, the more you realize, like, wow, this was undoubtedly a very tantric culture, and it was like embedded into the myths and the stories that underpinned and drove the entire religion that they had.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to look at. And what's saddening with that is that it's, so much of it has been forgotten. Like, I even speak to Egyptian people, and many of them are not even encouraged to go looking at those teachings, because either they're Arabic or they might be Coptic Christians. And so they've also been brought up with a religious belief system that is almost saying, like, don't go look at that stuff, because that's the old stuff. Like, this is what we should be following now. And some of that obviously brings its own dogma. So I feel like these teachings are coming through people such as myself, I think, because I've thankfully not had that dogma impressed on me so strongly.
Do you think that at the moment there is more of a rising up and a remembrance? You know, it's like, for me, not that long ago, I had this huge remembrance and download about being in the Temple of Isis and about some of the stuff that was done. Like, it was really strong. And I know that, you know, for me, I felt that in November, the kind of veil started to shift. And it was almost like the timelines were merging. And it was almost like it was coming forward into not just my consciousness, but other people's consciousness. And I was seeing people and seeing this recognition of, I know you, and I know where I know you from. Yeah. Do you feel that that's been speeding up recently?
Yes, although I'm aware that I might have a slightly biased perspective on it. Because I've been marinating so much in these teachings.
Yeah.
What I'm finding is so many people that I'm meeting are like, oh, like, knew you from Egypt, knew you from Egypt, knew you from Egypt. It's a little bit like, it is like Egyptian time for some reason.
Yeah.
And I'm also aware of, like, well, maybe this is just my perception and experience of reality at the moment. I don't know. But I do notice that a lot of other people that I'm meeting are, you know, like, I've had friends randomly saying, like, oh, like, you're getting into Egyptian stuff. Like, I was in Egypt like 4 months ago, was really feeling the call to go there. So it does seem like it is in the field. And I'm also aware that I might be biased in my direct experience of that reality as well.
Obviously you're attracting it because that is the field you're merged in, so you're pulling like attracts like, but I do think that is what is resonating. I feel that kind of resonance of this remembrance. It's almost like it's an empowerment. It's like it's now time to re-empower ourselves with that divine sovereignty, almost that divine wisdom that is within our body, of taking ownership of our body again and saying, hang on, like, this is our sacred vessel. This is, for men and women, our sacred connection to the divine, and we shouldn't be ashamed to be in it and to revel in it and to use it to work with it, to connect to these incredible this incredible life force that is all around us and that we're part of.
Absolutely. And I think the other, when you were asking about what else have I received from it, it's been a very powerful remembrance of how multidimensional reality is. And since Isis has come in, and I feel like these veils and doorways were kind of opened, and veils were lifted, doors were opened. And the further I went with my own personal spiritual practice, it would take me into more and more levels of reality and consciousness. And after a while, I was like, oh my God, like, this is what we can all access, you know, like, it's not just like, oh, I'm so special. It's like, no, it's not that. I feel like every single human has this capacity to access this multidimensional nature. And the first time I heard the words multidimensional, I was like, what the fuck is that? You know, like, what is this hippie person talking about? And now I find that I'm using it in my vernacular, and how I would summarize it for someone who's a little bit like, what on earth does that mean? for me, what it means is, obviously we have a 3D physical body. We also have an energy body. You can't see the energy body, but you can feel it. At times you can feel it in your body as emotions. At times you can feel it as energy that builds if you're dancing or running or doing whatever you might be doing, making love. Whatever you might be doing, you can feel that energy. Other higher levels of consciousness, you can start connecting to gods and goddesses or other aspects of consciousness that genuinely want to support and guide us, and I do feel like some of that is through a path where you are able to listen deeply, be that in meditation or some kind of practice that creates a space for the connection, not just to establish, but for the words to start coming through. And when Isis first came, it was very like, there was a first contact that felt powerful, and some specific things about the Ankh were shared. After that, it was very fleeting. It would be like a few words or a few little bits of guidance here and there that was just enough for me to do a bit more practice with. And then the next day it would be a little bit more, and then a little bit more, and then suddenly it was like the whole thing opened, and then it was like a massive river, a torrent of information poured through.
Amazing. We've only got a couple of minutes left. The time has absolutely flown. There is something I would like to ask you, and it might be putting you on the spot, and if you can't do it, then that's fine. I would love to know what the Isis chant is.
The Isis chant?
Yeah.
Well, I can send you a link to it because it's a long chant.
Okay.
I could do it, but it would take about probably 7 or 8 minutes to get through.
So we've only got 2 minutes, so maybe
okay, let me give you the short form. Let me give you the shortest version.
Okay.
Okay, let me think. So you could, for example, say Nehez Auset, which would be awake Isis. Obviously, Isis is the name that the Greeks gave to her. Her original name was Auset or Aset. So you could say Nehez Auset, Nehez Auset. So that would be awake Isis. And then often you would then say Nehez Emhotep, awake in peace. So you're inviting her in, you're inviting that awakening, and for that to be a peaceful connection to establish between the two of you. Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah, amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me on Kind of Sound. I think part 2 is definitely going to have to come because there's so much more
part 2.
Talk about. For those of you listening, I hope you've enjoyed the show. Please do check out Kiya's book on Amazon, Egyptian Tantric Secrets. Got it right this time.
Yep.
And all the links so you can contact him will be in the description. So do please go and check out his work because it is amazing. And I hope you've been as inspired as I have been by this show. As always, if you like what you're hearing on Kind of Sound, please do think about donating to Kind of Sound or buying some of the lovely merchandise, which is all vegan and recyclable and beautiful stuff to support this radio station of kindness and community. So thank you again for being with us today, Kiya.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on. And yeah, it's been a pleasure talking. I love talking about this subject. So yes, very happy to come back for a part 2.
Amazing. Thank you and take care, Kind of Sound listeners.